It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
Hey guys, how is it going? And welcome to the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. It is Wednesday, September 13th, and so happy for you joining us. We are ready to start another day together with the Lord. So subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on SoundCloud, and make sure to support us on Patreon. Today we do have an exciting podcast for you. We have Health is Happiness, the Apocryphal word study for foundational books, and of course commentaries, updates, and news on what is happening around the world in this history today. All right, everyone, how are you doing? Today is hump day. It is the middle of the week. Hope you guys have enjoyed your week thus far. If you haven't yet, please leave a like and comment below to build our community. Just super happy that everyone is joining us every weekday on the Morning Star Drive. So let's get up and support each other each and every day. This week's Sunday message title, Learn from Me, the One Who Broke the Seal. All right, so, I had a pretty rough morning. Now, rough morning doesn't mean like it's like super bad, but it was pretty rough for me because it's only, well, for me on my end, it's Tuesday, right? It's not Wednesday. Wednesday over there in Asia, but Tuesday over here. And, every morning we have two choices we have to make. Of course, the first choice is, do I get up for pre-dawn or not? Okay, so that's the one, that one seems to be, everyone's slowly getting back on track for the pre-dawns and such. But the second one that's a tough one is, pre-dawn, sometimes the messages or the messages are kind of short. So it ends at like 5:10 a.m. or 5:15 a.m. And then you have another choice. Do I sleep a little bit more before I go to work, before I go to class or anything else? Or do I start the day, right? And, of course, there are, I believe, for myself, I choose one day a week to just super sleep in. Just to cover up all my sleep debt. And that's usually Friday or Saturday morning. I'll just, go straight into it. And I'm going to really, sleep as much as I can just to pay off all the sleep debt I had during the week and stuff like that, right? But today, after pre-dawn, it was like 5:10 a.m. And I'm just looking at my bed, and it's a little bit cold outside. So, I'm just kind of like, oh, it's kind of cold, right? And, I had the choice to go, I made the choice to go back to sleep. And I don't usually do this, right? So I woke up a few hours later, and just, there's such a terrible feeling when you wasted so much time. Even right now, I'm doing this podcast a little later than I usually do because I got a little bit more sleep. And, the thing that I really enjoy for Sunday to Thursday, it's like my work week. And I do have this routine that I go through. I wake up for pre-dawn, then I get ready. I go out to the cafe at 7 a.m. I'll have breakfast, which is basically fruits and vegetables. And I'll go to the cafe at 7 a.m. Then I'll prepare for the podcast. I go home. And I'll start recording the podcast. I get done everything with this new schedule that I have for myself. I get things done a lot earlier, like much earlier. I'll have at least 2 hours to spare, right? Today, because I slept in, I was just like, I couldn't go to the cafe in the morning. I just prepared at home, and I just thought to myself, man, that's the power of routine. And one of the reasons why we make routines is to be more productive, is to be more effective or efficient or whatever it is, right? And that routine is there to make us better. And of course, one thing I saved money because I didn't buy coffee, and I made my own coffee this morning. But yeah, it just doesn't feel good to waste time, especially when I just turned 45. And more than half my life has passed me by. I don't have much of this great time left when I'm super healthy, right? So, I'm like, man, don't waste this time. And that's something that I really thought, I thought about this morning. When I woke up, it's just that dreaded feeling oh, what a waste. I wasted 2 hours. I could have done other stuff. I wouldn't be rushing things, or I wouldn't be kind of in that groggy state. Once you wake up for pre-dawn, of course you're going to be tired right after, and you got that choice. And sometimes you just got to make the good choice, right? The good choice, the best choice. I know I have my sleep debt sleep-ins, which is on Friday or Saturday morning because I don't work those days. But I was just like, oh, what a waste. It was just such a waste of time for me this morning. But tomorrow, I am not going to do that, and I'm going to make sure that I'm going to talk about it in tomorrow's pre-dawn that I made the right choice, kind of thing. I get to the cafe at 7 a.m. or whatever like that. One thing I do want to talk about, which I really enjoy, is everyone, guys, I enjoy your comments. Your comments are awesome. Your comments are some are funny, some are very informative. Like Ali Kim from Korea also wrote about. Remember, I talked about dragons yesterday because someone was asking about Sunseem's dreams, and I was talking about it in Korean culture. And Ali is from Korea. She did research on this too. And that's why I think the community is so important for us, guys. It is so important because we're able to share with each other knowledge from culture, knowledge from our country, knowledge from the people's thoughts in your country and such, and things that other people might not have known. But I was just... I was able to think about this once again because Ali gave this great comment about dragons. And I think this is why community is so important. The ability to help each other out, give more info about your culture, your people, your language, whatever it is. And I talked about Sunseem's dream, a mother's dream of having giving birth to a dragon. There was a dragon, right, in the dream. And someone was asking what that actually meant. And Ali gave an even more in-depth analysis or information on dragons in Korean culture. So this is what she wrote. She said, throughout Korean history, a dragon meant a king, actually. It means king, right? So this is even better. And during the Joseon dynasty, kings wore clothes with dragons on them. And during the Korea dynasty, kings even asserted that they are the lineage of a dragon. For instance, his grandma is a dragon or something along that line. And also, dragons aren't supposed to be dragons at birth. At first, they are some sort of gigantic snake. In Korea, there's this imaginary animal called the imugi, right? That's like that gigantic snake. And they have to train under the water for 1,000 years to become a dragon. And another very interesting fact she brought up was, she said while she was researching on the topic, there's a specific dragon called the Gyeryong. And that means the rooster dragon, which is kind of cool because Sunseem is a rooster, like if you look at the zodiac. And it has the same Chinese characters from, there's a mountain in Korea called Mount Gyeryong, right? So super thankful and grateful for that info. That'll help people even more to understand the Korean culture. And having that dream of a dragon is actually a great thing in Korean culture, all right? So I hope that helps you guys out even more. Like I said, if you guys have more information out there, I would love it. Karen had a funny comment because it's only funny to me. Because I'm born in the 70s, right? So I grew up in the time where the first real Asian kung fu actor was Bruce Lee. And in her comment was, who is Bruce Lee? Everyone in the Asian culture is going to know who Bruce Lee is, right? It doesn't matter what year you're born. Everyone knows Bruce Lee, but it's interesting that we're in a different generation. They don't know the same people that we know. She's like, who's Bruce Lee? He's Bruce Lee. You got to go check him up on Wikipedia or Google him up. But he is the first famous Asian actor who came out with kung fu movies, and he was amazing, right? Even today, when you look at the UFC and all the mixed martial arts, they all look at Bruce Lee as the originator of mixed martial arts, which is quite amazing, right? So I found it to be very, very funny. Right? Very funny that she asked the question, who's Bruce Lee? It just kind of aged me. It's that's the age group I'm in right now. That the people growing up don't know who Bruce Lee, they probably don't even know who Chuck Norris is either. He's the US karate champion and stuff like that also. And he also was in one of Bruce Lee's movies, Return of the Dragon. But yeah, it was funny because it really aged me. It did. Right? Yeah, so that's kind of the situation there. But yeah, guys, keep putting in your comments. Would love to hear about it. Yeah, some of them is informative. Some things are kind of insightful, and there's funny comments out there too, even when you're trying not to be funny and stuff. But thank you so much for your comments, guys. I really appreciate it. And every comment is building this community, right? That's what we want. When you look at other YouTube channels, they have millions of subscribers. They have thousands upon thousands of comments, right, for each of their videos. Of course, we're not even 1% of a million, right? we're not even close to that yet. But that's okay, because this is for members, and I see the community thriving through the comment section, and I think it's awesome, right? And just the way we support each other and such, I am super thankful. And like I said, over the last 3 weeks, I believe, the Patreon has been growing, and I am super thankful for all the people out there that are supporting financially. I think it's an amazing and awesome thing. People, like, almost probably once every 2 days there's someone else like joining and stuff, but once every 2 or 3 days around there. But thankful once again, you guys are awesome, right? And it really, really helps in this ministry. And as we're going to push forward for the Espresso with Sky, we're going to get those new podcasts coming out too. All right. So there was a question actually from Karen. Karen actually asked me a question about, in the Sunday message, it talked about drinking itself is a sin, right? And one of the big questions that did come out is about Jesus drinking wine. Was it alcoholic? Because people are going to bring up, well, Jesus drank wine, right? So what I'm going to first do is I'm going to talk about wine at the time of Jesus, what did they actually drink? Was it actually wine? And the answer is yes, it was wine. It was fermented fruit, right? So it is alcoholic for sure. So that we're not going to escape that part itself, right? But, a lot of people in faith, they actually know little about the ancient Mediterranean world, right? They kind of just think when they say alcoholic wine, they think it's the same thing as what we drink today, but it's far from it. Right? It's kind of just an assumption that people have that, it's the same type of alcohol that we are drinking today, but it's not, right? When you look at the scriptures, one of the most famous scriptures for drinking is Ephesians 5:18 that we heard is, don't get drunk, right? Of course, that's one thing there. And other texts show in the New Testament that some authors approve the use of wine in moderation, right? So one of those verses is going to be in 1 Timothy, right? So let's take a look at this verse. In 1 Timothy chapter 3, and I believe it's verse 3 and verse 8, it says, verse 3 talks about not to give in to drunkenness, and verse 8 is, in the same way, deacons are to be worthy of respect, sincere, not indulging in much wine, which means that indulging is to be getting too much into it, right? So people, Christians will view that as, so you can drink a little bit as long as you don't get drunk kind of thing, right? But yes, the New Testament authors, it seems like some people are approving of it, right? But we do need to know the culture and the wine and the things that they had back then compared to today are very, very different. For instance, wine was much cleaner than water, and that's why everyone drank a diluted form of wine, right? So it's not the same of modern alcoholic beverages, right? So even when we talk about drinking alcohol in moderation, it's much different than what we have today, because even the wine back then in the ancient Mediterranean civilization, it's even lighter than beer. It's even lighter than beer, right? So it is kind of an assumption that people are comparing alcohol to our time right now, right? So the New Testament wine, which is ordinarily consumed in the New Testament, significantly different from modern alcoholic beverages, right? So how is it different? So first of all, ancient beverages did not contain distilled alcohol like modern alcoholic beverages often do today, right? So distillation was invented by Arab alchemists in the 8th century, long after the New Testament era. And the strongest alcoholic beverage that was accessible to the New Testament authors and the original readers was natural wine that had an alcoholic content of anywhere from 11 to 12%. So you're going, well, 11-12% is like wine today. Well, wine today is usually 15 to 20%, but that's still a lot because that's double of what beer is, right? So you're okay, so they did have alcohol, but nothing as strong as we had today. But the thing that's very, very different about the ancient Mediterranean civilization wine is it was normally diluted. Even ancient pagans considered drinking wine at full strength, which is 11-12%, to be a barbaric practice. So they usually diluted wine with large amounts of water before the wine was consumed. Right, so ancient wine was stored undiluted in large jars called amphorae, right? And before it was consumed, it was poured into large bowls called craters, where it was mixed with snow or water before being poured into cups. Now, the ratio of wine to water varied, right? And the ancient scholars were virtually unanimous that a dilution rate of at minimum 2 parts of water to 1 part of wine was necessary. right? So a lot of people would look at unmixed wine, if you don't dilute the wine, as primitive, that you were a cannibal or like people like barbarians, of like these people that live in the woods, right? And even some, like one of the scholars' name is Archippus. He said that even if you drink half wine, half water, right? So that's 1-to-1 ratio. You would consider a wretched person, right? There's like other authors who said if you mix wine and drink it moderately, it gives good cheer. But if you overstep the bounds, it brings violence. Mix it half and half and you get madness. So you kind of get the idea of what they thought about alcohol, right? And basically this person also said if you have wine that is unmixed, your body will collapse. So there's like a bunch of different discussions out there in the past, but there's a lot of ancient writers that talked about the ratio of water to wine. And even you guys know who Homer is, right? Homer even said what was natural is 20-to-1. 20 water to 1 wine. Like that's how high he was thinking about. Aristophanes, also very famous. He's like 2 to 3-to-1. Diocles said 2-to-1. Ion said 3-to-1. So there's a lot of different thoughts out there, right? But the one thing you have to understand is the alcohol content back then in the Mediterranean, the ancient Mediterranean times, was negligible by modern standards. Right? So when you look at the Old Testament Apocrypha, right? Now, the Apocrypha is something we're going to talk about in the second section today. And I think it'll be very, very beneficial for a lot of people to understand it and not just say, oh, it's not the Bible, so I'm not going to read it, right? They said the practice of diluting wine with water, Apocrypha talks about this, right? And in one of the books, it says, it is harmful to drink wine alone, or again, to drink water alone, while wine mixed with water is sweet and delicious and enhances one's enjoyment, right? So what does it say there? It's harmful to drink wine alone or to drink water alone because water wasn't clean. So you kind of get the idea of what water was like back then. So it was almost like a must that you're not going to drink just water alone. So this author I was reading did a careful study of the Mishnah and Talmud, right? And it shows that the normal dilution rate among Jews, guys, is 3 parts water to 1 part wine. So that is what Jews were drinking. So this is something that's more relevant when we're talking about Jesus, right? So they, basically they're saying it mixes well 3 parts water to 1 part wine to make it true wine, right? And also, you'll find in the Talmud and Mishnah that wine consumed during Passover was also 3-to-1. And this was very likely the commonly accepted dilution rate among the Jews of the New Testament era as well. And this dilution rate reduces the alcohol content of the New Testament wine to, guess what? 2.75 to 3% alcohol, which is very light because that's like half of what beer is. So basically what half of what beer is, right? So, it's very, very interesting to see that it's a lot different than what we thought. And there was a necessity involved with it. What was the necessity? The necessity is basically that you couldn't drink water alone because it was too dirty. You had to mix it with something fermented to make it cleaner. Right? And and even the wine that was available back at that time was nothing compared to modern alcoholic consumption. There's no distilled alcohol like we have today that makes it like 40%, 55%. And I know there's alcohol out there that's like 75.5%, right? And don't ask me how I know. That's from my high school days. But, it's pretty crazy, like the difference in alcohol back then and here, that even 11-12% was considered barbaric. So if the Jews are drinking 3-to-1, and mainly because it's cleaner than water itself, we need to understand the reason why they drank like that. There's a reason behind it, right? And I think this is a great point that people should know, that it's not the same as what it was, not what it is today, nothing close to it. Now, this kind of moves me to my next point, is just because Sunseem said in the message, drinking is a sin, right? Just because he said that, for us in Providence, it's we don't drink anyways, right? But one thing I do advise is please do not go to people outside of Providence, start telling them, oh, you can't drink, drinking is a sin, I don't think that's a good idea, right? Like, I know sometimes people get overzealous and they know, oh, this is the truth, and they start to try and educate everyone else on it, but please don't do that. right? Like, please don't do that. Like, this is something that we understand because we know this time period, right? We understand because we know who Sunsim is and stuff like that too. So if you want to stop someone else from drinking, do it in a wise way. Please don't go into the scriptures. Why? Because the scriptures don't have enough information in it for us to be 100% like absolute through the scripture. It says this, right? For myself, I have stopped people from drinking. I have. But I do it in a different way. I do it when I talk about it in two different ways. Number one is the studies on alcohol, what it does to your brain, what it does to your body, and also financially. Right? Like financially, what do you mean financially? Well, like just like say, look in the U.S. And when you look at a millennial, when we're millennials are they're in their 30s now, I believe, right? Millennials. Whoops. Let me just check the age group. Millennials, age group. Millennials age group is between 25 and 40 years old, which is about 72 million in the US, right? Just millennials themselves, which is like a lot of people that I teach, they spend about $300 a month on alcohol. That's the average, which means that's like $3,600 per year. Imagine what you could have done with that money. When you complain about money right now, but you still go out to drink. So I'll do one of those things where you're like, hey, imagine if you had an extra $3,000 or an extra $300 a month. What would you do with that money? There's one thing that people are like, oh yeah, money is an important thing. You could invest that and guess how much money you would have in 20 years or something along that line, right? And then, of course, I would talk about studies on alcohol because one thing that people don't know is alcohol is considered toxic. It's a toxic, psychoactive, dependence-producing substance, and it has been classified as a Group 1 carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer. What is a carcinogen? It causes cancer. So think about this. It's already been labeled by the Agency for Research on Cancer as Group 1 carcinogen. It causes cancer. It is toxic, psychoactive, dependence-producing, right? So when you look at that, it's like, whoa, that's pretty heavy, right? But a lot of people don't talk about these things, don't think about it, right? The second thing I would say is like I would go through some of the studies, right? And these are the studies you can go out and look on your own. There's studies that say that even a little alcohol harms your health. Even a little bit of it harms your health. Even psychologists say it leads to poor mental health. And I was reading about this in the past. It says the reason, how does alcohol lead to poor mental health? What happens is it starts off by getting rid of your inhibition. So you're more confident, you can speak better, like you can do things you didn't do before. So it uplifts that for a short while, but then it crashes and you become irritable and angry and stuff like that too. So it causes more, like you're gonna have a crash. Some people will get depressed and stuff like that too, right? So that's why it's bad for your mental health. There's like brain scans on people who drink alcohol and it slows your synapses between your nerves in your brain. So you're slower. That's why you can't drive very well. That's why you lose your balance and stuff like that too. The biggest one that I saw is the WHO that says no level of alcohol is healthy. No level is. And the risk to drinkers of alcohol is from the first drop. The first drop, right? And that's why for myself is because we're in this history, we know this history, we know who Sunsim is and stuff like that. When we hear these things, it's easy for us to take in. But people who don't know, they're not going to know. That's why I would refrain trying to like tell people, oh, it's a sin, it's this, God told us not to do it. They're going to say, where'd you find that in the Bible? And you're not going to be able to explain it very well. I would refrain from trying to explain it through the Bible. And in most cases, I don't explain it. Like my parents drink every day and I'm fine with it. Right? There's, and it's something that I know, like, yeah, we understand it for our history and our time, but we are bound to our laws. But we know in Romans chapter 2, Romans chapter 5, Romans chapter 7, that people who don't know the law are not held to that level or that degree, right? It's something for all of us in this history because we know. Now, I like I said, I would refrain from trying to get people to figure, like trying to explain to their parents and stuff like that too, or to their family or their friends, close friends and such, because it's gonna be an unnecessary fight you don't need to get into. There are far more important battles that need to be fought, right, than this. And I would say the greatest fight is gonna be salvation. And if you start trying to fight battles of these smaller issues, they're going to start not liking you, not listening to you, and whatever you say when it comes to the very biggest point when they're really looking for Christ, what's going to happen? They're not going to come to you because they're like, oh gosh, this person is so like burdensome or strict or whatever it is, right? The greatest fight we fight is salvation. Whether it's at the New Testament or Complete Testament level, that's the first step we need to take for people is that. And, honestly, people are going to understand and perceive at their own level. So don't try to put burdens on people that they don't need at that time. And especially, when it comes to people you meet a lot, you're close to, like family and close friends, you're just going to get yourself into a pickle, right? Where they're no longer wanting to be with you anymore. They don't want to hang out with you anymore. They're going to think that, and they're also going to start thinking that our church is weird and such because we're like, this is so weird kind of thing, right? So we know, and we have to understand for ourselves, right? And of course, yes, when people get overzealous, they feel the need, I got to save my friends and family from this evil sin. Actually, no, be wise. Most important thing first, right? So what's so good that you stop your family from drinking, yet they still don't have salvation? It makes no sense, right? So, once they realize the history, then they can they'll agree and they'll listen to what God says. Absolutely. Right? Like, interesting thing is, like, I just got a call yesterday from a friend in Malaysia, non-member, and we met through social media and such. We hang out, go have coffee because we both love coffee. And they know that I'm a missionary, a pastor, stuff like that too. I've never come to them and just started like going, hey, you gotta believe. I don't bring it up. They bring it up every once in a while, but we just hang out and have fun. Interesting thing is, this person just had a dream. This friend of mine, right, just had a dream that they were watching Jesus' crucifixion. And they said it was the most terrible thing to watch. They've never had a dream of Jesus before. And the first thing they did was they contacted me and said, hey, I just had this dream. What does it mean? And I said, hey, maybe it's time. Maybe God's telling you to start learning again. And they're like, yeah, maybe you're right. And I just connected them yesterday to someone in Malaysia. I just connected them. Right? And now, they're going to set a time to meet with them, and, they're going to check out to see what their level is and stuff like that too. Or like, are they ready to learn the word? Is it better for them to go to the former faith or here, whatever it is, right? So, think about that. I've been hanging out with them for like 6 months, right? When I was there in Malaysia, and I've known them for like a year and a half, whatever it is, right? I hang out with her and her husband and her friend and their husband. We just hang out like friends, right? And, think about it. I'm not the one bringing up all this stuff. They know who I am. They know that I'm faithful. They know that I go to church. They know all these things. I don't push it upon them, but I am very kind with them. We have lots of fun together, and we have good talks and stuff like that too. But when the moment came, when the opportunity, when the window opened, they came to me first, and I was able to connect them with a member. Right? Just yesterday. So it all happened within like a 3-hour span. Just call me, this. I had this dream. Oh my gosh. I called a member. Who can we connect? And I connected them together. And that was as fast as it gets. What's the most important thing? It wasn't me telling them you shouldn't drink. It wasn't me telling them, oh, that's a sin or this is a sin. It was more of me holding my morals and standards. Yet I let them do what they want to do. Right? But when the time came, they came to me. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's one of the best ways that you can do it when it comes to family and friends too, right? So, I thought that was a very, very amazing thing that God did with this person, this friend, and I was able to connect them, right? I did my part, right? This is something that just came up. So Provi in the media, actually the 7th trial, there's a new trial just happened yesterday. For for AJ, Kyla, for all the people for aiding and abetting the 6 executives of CGM, right? So the 7th trial actually just happened yesterday. I know I did the one before, like the week on the 5th or whatever it was, right? But this is the one that just happened yesterday. There's news on the trial just came out for this is a very, very interesting thing because you can see how crazy it is, what's going on over there with this trial. So one of the CGM executives, which is Kyla, said that rumor has it that Kim Ji-sun or Joon has the style of a scary dictator. That's the title. So they had the trial, and it was actually Kyla who was testifying against AJ, against Joon. As crazy as that sounds, right? So and this is something that's really crazy for me is because I've known them for decades, both of them, and they're close to each other. So it's a lot of the things in here makes no sense. I know that Joan and Kyla went on vacation together multiple times. So that's why some of the things when you read them is going to be like, this doesn't make sense to me because I know both of them and their relationship with each other, right? So let's get into the article. It says, believers say that Joan had enormous power over them. The second in command of CGM, who was arrested and indicted on charges of helping CGM leader, who's being arrested and tried on charges, right? On the morning of the 12th, which is in Asia, so it'll be the 11th in Western countries, in the 12th Criminal Division of the Daejeon District Court held the 7th trial for 6 CGM executives, including Joan. Now, at the trial on this day, Kyla, an executive for IMD, who was indicted along with AJ on charges of helping Sunstein commit crimes, appeared as a witness and answered the prosecution's questions regarding Joan. Kyla is also accused of aiding and abetting by serving as an interpreter when Sunstein committed the crime to 2 foreign female believers from February to September 2018. Now, the prosecution is saying that Kyla selected and managed foreign religious stars. Okay? So I think that's partly true. She was managing those stars, right? She was, right? But was she selecting them for that reason? Right? That's the bigger question. So the prosecution, remember, Kyla is one of the people that are being charged. The prosecution is against her. The prosecution asked Kyla, who appeared as a witness, to give a statement about Joan. And during the prosecution investigation in March, right? So in March, what did Kyla say? She said, I heard that AJ is a powerful person and even kicked out a pastor who criticized her. Okay? And, okay, so there's one thing. Then Kyla also stated, she said that, we, like as in her and I guess AJ, recommend people to positions they want and put them in public positions. And then in particular, it's already recorded that Kyla stated that Joan had a scary dictator style. However, interestingly, in response to this statement, so the prosecution brought this up and said, hey, did you say that she had a scary dictator style? Kyla responded yesterday saying, no, I didn't say that, right? Kyla denied it during the witness examination, saying, I never said that with my own mouth. The prosecutor, you guys said it. Then the prosecutor presented the suspect's interrogation report and asked, well, it's in your interrogation. You said this in your interrogation report. Why didn't you edit that part out, that she had a scary dictator style? When other phrases in the report were edited in detail, but you didn't take this part out. And Kyla replied, it was my fault for not checking properly. Now, at the same time, Kyla said, I have never had direct experience with AJ or with Joan, right? Which I know is completely false, right? Because I have pictures and stuff too of them being on vacation together and stuff like that too. So, and then she said, I only spoke about what I heard and felt. And at the time, various rumors were circulating within CGM, and there was even talk that Joan was arranging her close associates as secretaries and attendants to Sunstein. And this is what Kyla was testifying. Like, yeah, this is what's going on. I've never worked with her or had direct experience, which I know is a lie. And at the time, there were various rumors in Providence already that Joan was arranging her close associates as secretaries and attendants to Sunstein. And this is what she was testifying. Kyla was testifying. And then Kyla also said that the defendant, who was the only one among the CGM executives, like she's the only one who admitted to the crime, right? And the prosecution said Kyla made a false statement to receive a lower punishment. Right, which is very, very interesting. So it seems like they found out that she lied. It looks like they found out she lied in one of her statements just so she can have a lower punishment, right? So it's possible, like when we look at this, that maybe she's trying to just, she's admitting guilt so she can get a lower punishment from the other 5, which is quite interesting. So that is actually the trial that happened yesterday. I found it very, very interesting to see that Kyla was testifying basically against Joan, but then she makes false statements and she said things that, Yeah, I could probably call Korea and say, hey, I got the pictures. There's no such, Kyla, she's lying if she says she never had any direct experience with AJ. She worked with, everyone knows in Providence they worked together at one point, and they were close. And yeah, they had vacations together. 2 for sure, because I have the pictures, right? So when I look at that, I was like, yeah, this doesn't make sense. It really, really doesn't make sense, right? So it's really sad to see it moving this way. And it also is something that we have to realize how much more we need to pray for these 6 people on trial, right? We got to pray that everything comes out. We have to pray that the truth comes out. We pray that everyone has a good conscience, right? Because already amongst the 6 who are supposed to be on the same side, they're fighting against each other, right? So, yeah, I thought that was quite interesting to hear. So that is kind of the newest and latest trial that just came out, and that was yesterday in Korea for aiding and abetting, all right? So before we get to the first break, I just want to tell you today's foundational book is the Apocrypha. Apocrypha is, for those of you guys who don't know about the Apocrypha is very, very interesting. It's basically a collection of books written in the 4 centuries between the Old and New Testament. So it's in the intertestamental period between Malachi and Jesus, right? And the Apocrypha is not scripture, right? But many Christians, including great figures like Luther, Calvin, and other reformers, have found the Apocrypha useful historically, theologically, and spiritually. And discerning readers, I'm going to repeat that, discerning readers of the Apocrypha gain a fuller understanding of first century Judaism, including the messianic fervor that led in part to Jesus's dying on the cross, right? So it is, guys, it's a great segment. I hope you guys really enjoy this. It's something that I never looked into too, because I thought it's not in the Bible, so why would I read this? But I've been researching on it, and it's very, very interesting. That's going to be second segment, super insightful, and I hope you guys enjoy that too. All right, so let's get into the first break of the day.
I'll be with you in every way. Every moment of every day, I will be there to give you strength. God has filled me with His overflowing love. It's a love that flows unending each day. He keeps treating me in all the best ways. He keeps loving me unlike any other. Now that I've realized I want
is a story of our love, every moment of my life, a thankful melody. He is my past, my present, my future without end. So I offer songs of love to my one and only God now. Now that I've realized
All right, so let's get into today's word study. And every Wednesdays, we've been doing these foundational books of Christianity word studies. And I hope it's something that you guys are really, really enjoying. Today's is I really, really enjoyed researching today's because today's is about the Apocrypha. So I did talk about this. These are a collection of books from the time of Malachi to Jesus. And they're very, very insightful, but it does require a discerning heart. Okay, so let's get into the Apocrypha. So many Christians have never read the Apocrypha. Many don't even know what the term Apocrypha means. And actually, the majority of Christians don't even care to read the books that aren't in their Bible. So is this a bad thing? Like, think about this. Should the Apocrypha be kept out of sight and out of mind? And like, say, Protestants or Protestants that were raised Roman Catholic would probably say, of course. And they've come to learn that the Apocrypha is uninspired and supports erroneous Roman Catholic dogma. And that's more than enough reason to disregard the Apocrypha, right? So that's why a lot of people don't even read it, okay? So if you look, as accurate as that negative assessment is, it's true, right? Disregarding the Apocrypha as a whole isn't necessarily the right response. And if you can read it discerningly, yet constructively, critically, charitably, doing so will lead us to see the many ways it actually enhances our understanding of the divinely inspired scriptures. So rather than just kind of like thrusting the Apocrypha out of your mind, out of sight, let's take a look at what we'd be missing if we just threw it all away. So let's get into kind of a brief description of the history of the Apocrypha, right? And then we're going to get into like some theological, spiritual benefits and questionable source offers that people have to think about too, okay? So the Apocrypha, when did it first appear? It first appeared in the Greek translation of the Old Testament called the Septuagint. And we know that what happened in the intertestamental period between Malachi and Jesus is that there was Hellenization where Greek culture, Greek language became, it went all over the Roman Empire, and a lot of the Jews started to speak Greek instead of Hebrew. So many couldn't even speak Hebrew, but they only spoke Greek. They couldn't even speak Aramaic. So the Greek translation of the Old Testament had to be done, which was the Septuagint, was the Greek translation. But in the Septuagint was the Apocrypha too. It was done together. Right? The Septuagint was produced in Alexandria, Egypt around 200 BC, but the individual books that constitute the Apocrypha were written roughly between 400 BC until Jesus came. Right? And this period of time is frequently referred to as the 400 years of silence, the Second Temple Judaism, the time between the testaments, the intertestamental period, whatever it is, right? And it essentially makes up that blank page in your Bible between Malachi and Matthew, which is quite interesting, right? So the word itself, Apocrypha, literally means hidden away. So you have to think about these writings were hidden or withdrawn from common use because they were regarded as containing mysterious or esoteric lore. Now, those guys don't know what the word esoteric means. Esoteric means like it was most likely intended to be understood by only a small number of people with specialized knowledge. Like that's what it's saying. Like, this hidden away books was containing these mysterious things that only people that knew would know, right? And it was too profound to be communicated to any except the people that they were talking to, right? Because they knew the language, they knew the background to all these things. They had more knowledge. But in a pejorative sense, these writings are hidden for good reason. They are deemed theologically suspicious and even heretical by many. So both Jewish and Protestant circles flat out reject those writings as authoritative for the faith and practice of the church, but Roman Catholics, Orthodox Christians accept most of these texts as canonical. Okay, so think about that. Roman Catholics, Orthodox Christians accept most of the Apocrypha as canonical. All right, so they, there's other words they'll use for it, but it's the Apocrypha, right? So when the Apocrypha is mentioned when you think about the Apocrypha, it's referring to a bunch of books. There's a ton of books, right? Some of them you'll be like, what does that mean? Like, there's additional books of Esther, which is kind of cool. Baruch, Bel and the Dragon. That sounds like a fairy tale. Ecclesiasticus, right? There's Judith, letter of Jeremiah, the Maccabees, the prayer of Manasseh, which is a king we know, an evil king, the prayer of Azariah, Psalm 151. Psalms only goes to 150, but this 151 is in there. The wisdom of Psalm. There's a bunch of books in there. And how many books are there? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 14, 15, 16. There's 18 books in the Apocrypha, right? So as, when you think about many of these books, take the Old Testament as their starting point. So you see they're connected to the Old Testament, like Esther. In the book of Esther, she never explicitly mentions the God of Israel. She doesn't, right? If you read the whole book of Esther, she doesn't mention the God of Israel. But additions to Esther includes phrases or verses that describe God's sovereign action and oversight of the story. So those are what the extra books of Esther are. Baruch was Jeremiah's beloved secretary, right? And you'll find Baruch in Jeremiah 36:26, right? Baruch is there. And, there's only 150 Psalms, but Psalm 151 is added. Manasseh, wicked king over the southern kingdom, repented after being imprisoned in Babylon, right? His prayer of repentance, right, that you can find in 2 Chronicles 33, can be found in the Lost Chronicles of the kings of Israel. The prayer of Manasseh claims to be that ancient prayer, and the prayer of Azariah, which is Daniel's friend, also known as Abednego. And if you guys don't know Abednego, he's one of the three that was thrown into the fire and survived. The Meshach, Shadrach, and Abednego, but his Hebrew name, I believe, is Azariah, right? So you'll see the prayer of Azariah, Susanna, Bel and the dragon. They talk about Daniel's narrative in significant ways. So all these books fall under different categories of genre. For instance, historiography is one of the genres, wisdom, historical romance, liturgical pieces. There's a bunch of different categories within the Apocrypha, right? So if we're to take a look at a brief history of the Apocrypha, so Jesus and the New Testament authors never directly quote the Apocrypha. You'll never hear about the Apocrypha from those, like from the people of Jesus' time. And neither do they introduce it with labels that would suggest inspiration, such as it was written, or as it is written, or as the scripture says. Many echoes and allusions have been detected in the New Testament, but no direct quotes or obvious paraphrases appear in the New Testament. Okay, so you'll never see anything about the Apocrypha in the New Testament. And the same cannot be said of early church fathers, though. They frequently paraphrased portions of the Apocrypha and even called the writer, like there's a book called Second Esdras, another of the prophets. Right? And, during the day of Origen, who's also like a early Christian historian, he says like the Apocrypha became a normal part of the liturgy in church. But by the time Augustine and Jerome came on the scene, two opposing views emerged on these writings. Augustine, which is like the father of modern day Christianity, argued, and he came in 800, remember 800 AD, he wrote one of the most famous books. We talked about the very, very first one. But he argued for the canonicity of the Apocrypha, drawing from it frequently in his writings. Jerome, however, pushed back and distinguished between canonical and ecclesiastical texts. What's the difference? Canonical text informed faith and practice, but ecclesiastical texts were to be read in the church solely for edification, not to construct doctrine. Ultimately, in the Council of Carthage, and that's like 397 AD, sided with Augustine. Sorry, Augustine came 400, not 800, sorry. Augustine came 400. But the two views remained in the church until the Reformation, which is obviously the time of Luther. Now, one of Jerome's followers, Nicholas of Lyra, influenced a well-known reformer. What's his name? Martin Luther. We know him, the Protestant Reformation. Luther was forced to grapple with the status of the Apocrypha, especially in light of sola scriptura, right? With the 5 solas alone, right? And it's by scripture alone. And Rome's use of the Apocrypha to support the saying of the masses, prayers for the dead, and almsgiving as a meritorious act of penance, right? And in his preface to the Apocrypha, Luther echoed Jerome's distinction. These are books that, though not esteemed like the Holy Scriptures, are still both useful and good to read. Calvin did the same. Calvin followed suit. He interacted with the Apocrypha in ways that would make some Protestants cringe. He was edified by it and cited it in support of already accepted doctrines. However, and this is something really important, neither Calvin nor Luther ever used it as an independent, infallible, inspired source of doctrine. So that's a very important point, right? They were never used independently. They were always used to support what the Bible was saying. But the Roman Catholic Council of Trent in 1546 did. So following Augustine, they ruled most of the books of the Apocrypha, right, excluding a couple of the books, to be canonical. Many Protestant confessions of faith pushed back against Trent, and it's worth quoting 3 that describe the nature of the Apocrypha. So these are 3 quotes against the Apocrypha, right? So one of the articles says, and the other books, as Jerome said, the church doth read, for example, of life and instruction of manners, but yet doth it not apply them to establish any doctrine, right? So it's not going to establish doctrine. It's good for life and instruction of manner, right? And then another one, the Belgic Confession said, the church may certainly read these books and learn from them as far as they agree with the canonical books, but they do not have such power and virtue that one could confirm from their testimony any point of faith or of the Christian religion, much less can they detract from the authority of the other holy books. Okay? The Westminster Confession of Faith also said, the Apocrypha, the books commonly called Apocrypha, not being of divine inspiration, are no part of the canon of the Scripture, and therefore are of no authority in the Church of God, nor to be any otherwise approved and made use of than other human writings. So you look at these 3 confessional statements, they follow Jerome rather than Augustine, but they do so in distinct ways, right? One says that is basically distinguishing between canonical and ecclesiastical. It's okay for life, to learn for life and this, but it's not doctrine, right? That's the same as Jerome. And Anglican and Episcopalians read sections of the Apocrypha from the lectionary, which are also found in the Book of Common Prayer. The Belgic and Westminster Confessions draw a sharp distinction between the Apocrypha and the Holy Scriptures, right? So you see that there, as time goes on, there's a split between the Apocrypha and the Holy Scriptures, right? So we kind of see that this is how it's formed and came to be as we are looking at it today. Now, are there some benefits to the Apocrypha? Absolutely. For instance, there are historical benefits. Like from a historical standpoint, the Apocrypha sheds light on 2 monumental events in Second Temple Jerusalem, which is the 400 years between Malachi and Jesus, the Hellenization crisis and the Maccabean revolt. And these events shaped the consciousness and ideology of every Jewish person living in the first century and are therefore vital for the study of the New Testament. So what was the Hellenization crisis? I talked about this where that's the whole reason the Septuagint was, the Old Testament was translated into Greek, because a lot of the Jews, they didn't know Aramaic or Hebrew anymore. They only knew Greek, right? So the Hellenization crisis for the Jewish people is the Jewish people had been fighting against Hellenization ever since Alexander the Great came into possession of Palestine, right? Now, he didn't destroy the ancestral traditions of other cultures. He simply wanted them coalesced with the Greek way of life. To help facilitate that process, he made Greek the language of commerce, education, and literature. Cities were patterned after the Greek standard, like gymnasiums, stadiums, hippodromes, theaters were all erected, but the Jewish and Greek cultures were colliding, not coalescing. So from the older, wiser Jewish perspective, this collision was devastating to their Jewish identity. But from the younger, more immature Jewish perspective, this was an opportunity to acclimate to current cultural trends. And many young Jews were who wore broad-brimmed hats, just like the Greeks, and rushed through their duties at the temple to exercise naked in the gymnasium. Some of them even underwent an operation to hide their circumcision to avoid being ridiculed by the Hellenistic, their Hellenistic friends. So what emerged was a sharp divide. Some Jews were pro-Hellenization while others were anti-Hellenization. Anti-Hellenizers were referred to as the Hasidim. Some scholars think that this is the origin of the Pharisees, since they emphasized loyalty to God's law and covenant, and the pro-Hellenizers were neither faithful nor pious. So one clear indication of the pro-Hellenizers' impiety was their installation, without ancestral grounds, of a person named Menelaus, right, as a high priest, which was contrary to scripture. So the Hasidim were appalled, to say at the least, and then it caused this divide in the nation. Right? So you're going to get this historical background during these in the Apocrypha. The second thing I did talk about before is the Maccabean revolt. So 11 years after Palestine was Hellenized, Alexander died. His kingdom was divided, but it ultimately came down to 2 successors, the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. Okay, so Hellenization continued to take place under these dynasties, though you can read Ecclesiasticus, one of the books of the Apocrypha, to see how many remained faithful to traditional Jewish ideals during King Ptolemy's reign. Eventually, however, the Seleucids reigned supreme, and a vicious Seleucid king occupied the throne. His name was Antiochus Epiphanes IV, right? And he's considered the greatest enemy in Jewish history. He plundered the Jewish temples to fund his campaign against the Egyptians. While in Egypt, he received news that the anti-Hellenizers revolted against the pro-Hellenizers and the Seleucids. So Antiochus Epiphanes IV was not amused. He got back to Israel, tore down the walls of Jerusalem, erected a new citadel to dominate the temple area, stationed a garrison, and the city became a military settlement, right? So what eventually happens is he basically tries to get rid of the Jewish faith, right? And he tries to incorporate the worship of Baal, right? And who is identified with Zeus. And he tries to put them into God's temple. What's even more tragic, Antiochus prohibited Jewish religion, destroyed the scriptures. He didn't allow the Sabbath and festivals to be observed. Food laws were abolished. Circumcision could not be practiced. Mothers were actually killed for allowing circumcision to happen, and their infants were hung from their mothers' necks. And of course, the lowest blow came when Antiochus erected an altar and sacrificed pigs on it in the temple of God. So, of course, when this happened, the Hasidim, who were against Hellenization, they fled to the rural parts of Jerusalem. And one day, this is the big thing that happened, is a Seleucid official came to a rural village and tried to persuade a leading citizen named Mattathias to sacrifice the pagan gods on an erected altar. After he refused to do so, a fellow Jew complied with the request. Just then, out of zeal for God and his covenant, Mattathias sacrificed his fellow Jew on the altar, killed him, and killed the official. He then called on all those zealous for the law of their fathers to follow him, and then a revolution happened, which is called the Maccabean Revolt, right? Maccabean Revolution. And that's why the book of 1st and 2nd Maccabees, which is in the Apocrypha, gives an extensive account of this revolt, right? And of course, the most important figure is actually not even Mattathias, it is his son Judas. And he was given the name Maccabee, which means the hammer, right? And he was skilled in guerrilla warfare. He and his men raided villages, overthrew pagan altars, killed Hellenist sympathizers, circumcised children by force. So the Hasidim supported the event that came to be called Judas's Maccabean Revolt, or the Revolt of the Hammer, I guess. So 3 years after Antiochus profaned the temple, Judas and his troops conquered the Seleucids, right? They cleansed and rededicated the temple, right? And they also celebrated in the manner of the Feast of Tabernacles, right? So historically, it's all coming out, right? In the Apocrypha. So you can get a benefit of history that you cannot find in other books, right? Another major thing you're going to find in the Apocrypha, it shows the messianic fervor that happened in those 400 years, right? So how, you get like those two monumental events we just talked about, when it talked about Hellenization, we talked about the Maccabean Revolt, right? How did these two monumental events inform the consciousness and ideology of every Jewish person who lived in the 1st century AD? It gave them a messianic fervor. They longed for a warrior-like David Messiah who would crush their enemies, which is the Gentiles, cleanse the temple, renew God's covenant. And you kind of get the hints that they had this crazy expectation of what the Messiah would do, right? And you get hints of these expectations throughout the Gospels. The people were trying to make Jesus king, but he withdraws into the mountains. When Jesus tells Peter about his inevitable suffering as a Messiah, Peter rebukes Jesus, right? A crucified Messiah just didn't comport with his Jewish perception, one which came into prominence during the Maccabean period. But Jesus has 4 loving words to share with him. Get behind me, Satan, because they're thinking the wrong way. That all came from those 400 years that shaped the minds of the Jews wanting some type of Messiah. Right? So you think about this, at Jesus' triumphant entry into Jerusalem while he's riding a donkey, his followers spread palm branches on the ground, which is a national symbol of power and victory over oppressors during the Maccabean Revolt, while crying out, the King of Israel, right? And they're asking him to save them, right? And they wanted a different type of victory through glory. So, but Jesus' victory would come through suffering, right? Which was much different than what they were expecting. And the Apocrypha provides us with kind of this rich historical information that illuminates our understanding of the New Testament. And it gives us like a greater appreciation of our place in redemptive history and also an appreciation for the witness of the church during the 400 years of silence, right? So, there are so many benefits, even theological, spiritual benefits come out from this too, right? There's some parts that are not that doesn't really talk about it. Like some things that are in the Bible, like talks about some type of like purgatory, heavenly treasures and stuff like that too, that you won't find in the New Testament and stuff like that also. But yeah, there are some things that are not beneficial and stuff like that too, but there are like very, very beneficial things you get from reading the Apocrypha, but it's not doctrine itself, right? So yeah, and there's like basically you have to have the gift of discernment. You have to know it really well, and you're going to find golden nuggets of truth scattered throughout things that are not true. Errors you can call it, right? So it's a very, very good. If you are ready for it, it's a good read. I want everyone to understand this very well, what the Apocrypha is, and not only just understanding it, but seeing that there are some sorts of benefits when you can discern it really well. These are the 18 books that are between Malachi and Jesus, and a lot of historical value, a lot of the understanding the messianic fervor of the time when Jesus came. It can all be understood from these readings too. So you can basically say it's not inspired by God, but it's useful, right? It's not inspired, but it's useful. It's not for doctrine, but it's useful, right? It's more used in support rather than anything else, all right? So there it is, guys. That is a comprehensive look into the Apocrypha. I hope it's something that you guys really enjoy. I enjoyed it a lot, right? Just going and researching into it too. So if you ever get a chance, these are one of the other foundational books you can find in Christianity too, all right? So there it is, guys. Let's move into the second break of the day.
Through all the wind and the trials, still we never did break. It really wasn't very easy to put trust in that state. So even though our castles in the sand tumbled down, but all our tears streamed down together to cement the foundation. The tears rolled out continuously every single day, and I wouldn't hold it back because I got through so much pain. Now I stand and shake the dust off as I cling onto your Lord who's right before me. Oh Lord, you'll always be the only answer.
I don't sit here wishing happiness will come round. I don't sit and wait for it to walk through my door. Happiness comes to those who take action on love. When I love with perfect faith,
Yeah, perfect faith.
happiness will fill my heart.
When I'm faced with the roadblock, I think, what would you do? Even so, with all that thinking, I fall further in distress and agony. When I leave those thoughts behind, it's a better life. I leave my suffering and failures far behind me. You saw me struggle to chase a brighter future, but running after happiness, I turn to you, our eyes connecting. As you sweat, you flash a smile, and this is what you tell me. Let's create our own happiness, though times it may be difficult.
I don't sit here wishing happiness will come round. I don't sit and wait for it to walk through my door. Happiness comes to those who take action on love. When I love with perfect faith,
Yeah, perfect faith.
happiness will fill my heart. I'm not afraid, Lord, you have always been the answer for me. I'm not afraid, I'll hold your hand in mine.
Those days were once so painful and distressing. The massive waves that tore me down were scary and depressing. But though confusion, chaos, fear devoured me completely, the moment that I found you, I was spared out of the deep sea. Now all those moments in my life, no matter how I struggled, are precious and important cause they led me to our meeting. So now I'll never leave, you know my faith and love will not grow cold. And just as you have done for me, I will believe, I will love you more.
As long as I live, I pray only to look to your will. I'll offer prayers full of joy and happiness. I'll stand upon Christ as my rock. As long as I live, I pray only to look to your will. and kind. Love is always full of trust. Love is always full of hope. And love always perseveres. Love's always patient and kind. Love is always full of trust. Love is always full of hope. And through love we'll persevere here together.
Okay, so let's get into our final segment for today. And every Wednesday we do have Health is Happiness. And today is the final section on managing your weight with Julius over there in Australia. This is part 7. Hope you guys really enjoy this. And next week we do have a brand new episode of Health is Happiness. So hope you guys enjoy this. This is part 7 of Managing Your Weight with Julius Mayumo over there in Australia.
Hi everyone, Julius here, and welcome to the Health is Happiness segment. Here's where we discuss all the different ways we can improve health for a happy life, both physically and spiritually. This is episode 16, and today we're actually going to do one more segment on the topic of weight management. Now, this is a special extra episode that I decided to do after recalling a lesson done by a fellow Provi brother from America. Shout out to Mason Mendes. He did this really awesome lesson on flexible dieting, which I wanted to share with you guys today. And also big congrats on your new push-up record. I think he did something crazy like 1,500 push-ups. Absolutely insane. But anyways, today's segment will be quite interesting given what we've been discussing in the last couple of weeks. So 2 weeks ago, I did an episode on managing your caloric intake. And I shared some simple ways to do that without having to count calories too much. However, for those who would like to take it a step further and be more granular and precise in managing the amount of calories one is taking, I think this segment will be very useful. So what is flexible dieting? First of all, it involves planning your menu for the entire week, including the times you're going to eat each of your planned meals. Excluding your cheat day if you choose to have one. Second, as the name suggests, this dieting strategy allows you to cheat throughout the week. Now, sometimes you have situations where it's very impractical to stick to your diet 100%. For instance, let's say everyone's going out to lunch after Sunday service. Then you're going to end up eating the restaurant food instead of the meal you prepared in your weekly menu. Now, with flexible dieting, you are allowed to do that. That meal acts as a replacement for the lunch meal you previously planned. Then for the rest of the meals for that day, you adjust your caloric ratios for each macronutrient based off your pre-calculated daily needs. So, how do we do this? First of all, we start off by calculating something called our BMR. And this stands for basal metabolic rate. This is the number of calories your body needs to accomplish its most basic life-sustaining functions. Now we have an equation for this, so we just need to plug in some numbers. We'll need to plug in our weight, our height, and our age. I'll put a description of the equation below, and you can also search it up on Google. Just type in BMR equation. So, you want to make sure that your equation also matches the measurement system you're using. Once you make the calculation, you want to consider your level of activity, because this is a method of dieting that is constant throughout the whole week. So we have to account for how much activity we're doing throughout the week, and there's 5 basic levels. Depending on what our level of activity is, you will multiply your BMR with a particular number. So first of all, we have sedentary. So that's for the people who have desk jobs and do not do any exercise. Multiply your BMR with 1.2. Second, we have light activity. This category is for those who exercise 1 to 3 times per week. Here you'd multiply it by 1.325. Next, we have moderate activity. These are for people who exercise 3 to 5 times per week, and here you'd multiply it by 1.55. Next, we have very active, and that's for those who exercise 6 to 7 times a week. And for this, you'd multiply by 1.725. Last of all, we have extremely active. Almost no one will be in this category. That's for people who exercise 6 to 7 times a week and also have a physically demanding job, and they would multiply their BMR by 1.9. Now the final result that you get will give you your total daily energy expenditure in calories. Now, if you wanted to lose weight, you would decrease the amount by 20. And if you wanted to gain weight, suppose if you're bodybuilding, for example, you would increase it by 20%. Now, once you have this number, the next step is dividing up all those calories into your macronutrients. So that's your proteins, your carbs, and fats. Nice and simple. First thing that you'd need to consider is your protein intake. Now, the recommended consumption of protein is 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. To change that to calories, multiply that by 4. Next, we have fat. Now, I've already talked about how fat is an important macronutrient that's absolutely necessary in our diet. Fat is your friend when it comes to both gaining weight and losing weight. The thing about fat is that it keeps you full for way much longer, which can help prevent you from overeating, as long as you're mindful about measuring the caloric density of the fat you're consuming. So you want about 25% of your calories to come from fat. Generally speaking, saturated fats should be limited to 10% of that quantity, and the rest can come from monosaturated or polyunsaturated fat sources. Nuts, avocados, olive oil, and fatty fish are good examples. Now, everything else left over will be filled with carbohydrates, which includes your fruits and vegetables. Now, once you've sorted your ratios for your macronutrients, it's really a matter of figuring out what to eat. Here's where you want to pay attention to the nutritional label of your foods to figure out your macronutrient caloric densities. You can also always do a quick Google search for the answer. Each week, you have your menu planned. Doing meal preps is a really great way to help you stay consistent throughout the week, because you just have to cook it once, then you don't have to worry about it till the end of the week. Now, I really do want to emphasize that it's really important to check your nutritional labels. Otherwise, all the work that you've done until now will be rendered pointless. When looking at your carbs also, it's very important to subtract the calories from fiber, because your body actually cannot digest the calories in fiber. I do want to remind everyone who's keen on monitoring their calories very closely to download MyFitnessPal. This app is just phenomenal at making things much easier. Also, don't stress too much if you're not absolutely exact with your macro intakes. If you're off within 10%, you will still be able to reach your goals. So there you have it, folks. Now, before I close, there is something I want to continue to emphasize in this health segment. Nutrition and health is quite personal, and one thing won't always work for everyone, even if it works for a lot of people. There are the general facts that apply, like do not eat processed food, but there's so many factors that are highly specific to each individual. So I try my best to share balanced research, and since I'm not a certified expert in the field, I do want to mention that if anyone does have pre-existing health conditions, it's always highly recommended to consult a medical or nutritionist expert, because they can highly customize things according to your unique situation. So that's it for today's episode. And now we're finally moving on to a new topic. Big thanks once again to Mason for his really helpful insights, and I'm sure it will help a lot of people. Please drop a comment below if anything stood out to you, and thanks for tuning in once again, and see you next time.
And thank you so much, Julius, for the last part 7 episode of Weight Management. Hope you guys really enjoyed this. Have any questions, go leave it in the comments below. He would love to hear from you, even though it's an older episode, all right? So there it is, guys. That is the end of today's podcast, today's Wednesday podcast. Hope you guys have an amazing and awesome service tonight. And we'll see you guys again tomorrow on the Morning Star Drive on 117.8.
It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like this. I got my head in the zone, you know. I'm on the Morning Star Drive, you know. I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm like this. I got my head in the zone, you know. I'm on the Morning Star Drive, you know.